Welcome back to My Trauma's Chronic, but I'm Iconic. Get ready to meet an incredible person who's an expert in workplace dynamic and leadership. Allow me to introduce you to David Howell. He's the author of Speak Up, Listen Down, Redefining and Unlocking the Power of the Human Factor. With his wealth of knowledge and experience, David has become a go-to resource for understanding workplace bullying, toxicity, and the crucial role of leadership in addressing these issues. So let's dive into this conversation with David Howell and uncover some valuable insights together. So without further ado, let's welcome David Howell. What inspired you to join the police service and pursue a career in law enforcement?
Great question. It's a bit of a long story. I didn't actually want to join the police. I wanted to fly helicopters. I wanted to join the Navy, but that wasn't going to happen because of a medical issue that I would have had to put down on the application form. So I kind of backed out of that. And then my family were involved in the construction industry. So my dad was in steel frame buildings. My brother was an architect, and I went to become a quantity surveyor, but it just wasn't me. And I joined a surveying company in Burton-on-Trent in the Midlands. And what happened was I got very bored with it very quickly, to be honest. It wasn't for me. But I'd look out the window and see the police officers walking along the street and think, wow, that must be fantastic. I'm doing something different every day. And yeah, you'd see the blue lights go up and down the road as well, and think, I'm going to do that because they're making a difference. I'm just pushing figures and yes, making money and building and everything else, but it just didn't fit with me. So much to my, should we say, my mother's annoyance, I joined the police service. And she did warn me. She warned me that I would see some nasty sights, deal with some quite evil people, and it would be nothing like kind of my home life and what I've experienced. But yeah, and she was right. She was totally right. I did see some things. I did see some quite evil people. But on the flip side, you see the extremes. You see those people, wonderful people within the police service and without, and they're out there. And that was the amazing thing. I met some amazing people as a result and had some amazing experiences as a result. And hopefully along the way, those 30 years made some kind of difference, for better or worse for some people, because yes, you've got to do some, should we say, not nice things, should we say, when you're arresting people who know that could be end of their career, certainly in terms of, say, like drink driving. And then you've got to have the flip side, but they have broken the law, they could have killed somebody in that process. So it's all that kind of moral juggling, isn't it, as well? So, but yeah, I never look back, to be honest, on my police career. I'm very fortunate. Hopefully make my mum proud at the end of the day as well.
I'm sure you've done like so many like wonderful things, because before you joined, I've done the introduction, and there was like, so many wonderful things that you've done, and so many different things, and
Yeah.
so much change. I'm sure your mother will be extremely proud of you. Can you share a memorable experience from your time as a unit executive officer for the Central Counties Air Operation Unit?
Yeah, that came about 2005. I joined the air unit 2002, 2001, became the kind of sergeant for it within the Midlands. That was the base that I helped run at that point. And we looked after West Mercia Police and we looked after Staffordshire Police. And one of the most memorable things was actually this time of year, 2013, quite a tragic affair. And I don't know if you remember, there was a police helicopter that crashed in Glasgow on the Clutha pub, and 9 people tragically died. And that was November 2013, quite vivid. And you think, well, what did you have to do with that? And we had several things. Obviously, air support is a very close-knit family, really. It's a very small kind of niche within the police service, but everybody tended to know everybody else, and everybody got on well with each other, and well, generally did anyway. And kind of had that same kind of mindset, that same kind of, I want to get out there and do stuff and I want to kind of help people. Anyway, we got a call to go up and actually provide air cover, should we say, in Scotland at the end of November, not long after it happened, for certain reasons that we could work in terrain, had night vision goggles, the goggles that go on your helmet, you can have a better vision at night. So I got a call to say, can you put a team together from your base and you're going up to Scotland? And this is just before Christmas. And I think this kind of underlines the kind of culture, for want of a better word, the environment that we had. Is I thought, oh crikey, I'm gonna have to try and get people to go to Scotland who had families just before Christmas, who had seen colleagues sadly die in a helicopter that we flew, the same helicopter we flew. I thought it's going to be a hell of a job to try and coax, although there's obviously a legal obligation for their work that they would have had to go. But I need to worried really, because people were phoning me to say, can I come? Can I come? And I had more problems with people who couldn't go, who desperately wanted to go and help and show, should we say, solidarity and support to their colleagues in Scotland. Yes, we probably didn't know them very well, if at all. But there's that camaraderie within the police service that we help each other, certainly in times like that and critical times. And I had more problems kind of letting people down, should we say, that they weren't to go. And we spent nearly 2 weeks in Scotland supporting Police Scotland. Sad times, but memorable times. It's a weird kind of dichotomy there to some extent, that it's a horrible thing to go and do and fly over the same place that your colleagues died. But on the other hand, you were supporting them and supporting the communities as well, that they've still got air support there that they could rely on and shout out for help.
It seemed like there was a lot of things, flying in everybody's minds. Like it it shows also how quickly people are quick to, how quickly people want to help.
Yes.
Like,
Yeah. The human thing there, isn't there?
yeah. And it's like people don't usually hear about the human side of policing. They
Yeah.
hear this happened, this happened, this happened, which needs to be shared so people are aware of it, but also the good times need to be shared as well. And this is, I
Absolutely.
feel like, a perfect example of what people who are in the right frame of mind for this sort of job. Should I take my medication sorry. Because my sentences are not flowing. Like people who are in the right frame of mind.
I know what you're after. Yes. And this strangely, it kind of leads into what I'm doing now after I've retired. And that's because part of my work within air support, a large bulk of it was training something called crew resource management. Because, and it's a general fact that air accidents, air incidents, it's 80% of those incidents are created or occur due to human error, whatever human error is, or human interaction. I'd probably go to say it's more than that, because even defects on aircraft there's some human, shall we say, element to it or interaction somewhere along the line. And the bulk of my work was training crew resource management, the human factor. And that's what I've taken on in my new role. And exactly what you said, it's understanding people and ensuring that their environment around them and who they are and how they interact with others and their mental well-being, that's a key thing. Their mental well-being is stable. And they have that self-management, self-ability to manage themselves as well, getting to that critical point. Because if you're in that space, if you know that everything around you got your support and everything else around you, then you can operate and make better decisions because of it. So I know what you were trying to get at then. It's that human element, that individual human element as to who we are. But how do we interact with others, and how do those people you're interacting with interact with you? And it's that kind of bouncing off each other, isn't it? If you have the right people around you, you know how well you can work and you thrive and flourish. And we start talking about that kind of psychological safety, don't we? But that's an organic thing for me. That's not a manufactured do A, B, C, and D, you get psychological safety. There's a lot of other leverages or levers to pull to get to that space, to do it organically rather than manufactured, should we say. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And I feel like the humanness is something that people, as they either go up the ranks in whatever career, anything that's, people-centered, they forget. But it's nice to see, like, you haven't clearly forgotten that. And everything that you do is always people-centered, and you're making a world of difference.
I hope so. And there's a long way to go.
Yeah, there's a long, yeah, we can
Yeah.
put a big emphasis on that as well.
Yeah. And talking about that, as people go up the ranks, they tend to forget about that. I don't know if they forget, but actually what we see again is a lot of people over promoted, which cause them to put to one side that human element rather than forget that once you get or become over promoted, you're fighting for your own space and fighting to retain that kind of ego, shall we say, that prestige of having been promoted. And people forget that actually, if they relied and worked and helped the others around them and below them and above them, we get this synergy, we get this kind of solving our own problems together. And to do that, to be vulnerable as you go up the ladder, to say, folks, I don't know this. I'm sorry, I'm not the kind of generator of all the ideas and the solutions. That's to you. I'm just going to provide you with the space to do it in. Yes, I'll tap in, I'll try and give you guidance and a bit of a steer based on perhaps my experiences or potentials, but it's over to you. So it's for leadership. I don't think it's forgetting. I think it's, so a lot of people don't want to be seen as vulnerable, and they default to a poor environment, poor kind of decision making as they get higher up the ranks, rather than bringing people in and helping them more than anything else. So it's complicated, isn't it?
I feel like it is very much a multifaceted issue. But like with your experience as, the base manager for air operations in Greater and Central London, how did that role contribute to your understanding of leadership and training within policing?
Yeah, another great question. It probably came via a negative way. It sounds strange. It wasn't a positive thing. And that brings into it the bullying that I experienced, and also self-awareness on my part as well. And this is, again, some of the work now we're promoting in terms of psychometrics, but not psychometrics as generally people know it as, oh, it's personality, it's XY, it's your blue green. It's beyond that, as it were. But there was a problem arose within, well, the National Police Air Service, and it was down to changing shift patterns for the base managers, and there's only 15 of us across the country. And I saw a better way. I saw that the way that they were actually going about it could lead to people leaving. People leaving means there's a higher risk of younger, less experienced people coming along. There's a certainly cost issue, because obviously it costs thousands and thousands of pounds to recruit and to train somebody in such a specialist role. And I put these ideas forward, and I got shot down in flames, really. And that's when I experienced the bullying from a senior leader within the air service there. And that really knocked me for six, as it were, mentally and physically. I was basically frog marched all the way from London up to Wakefield to have a 2-hour non-disciplinary and welfare meeting, which it was tabled as, which was wasn't the case, full stop. It was basically to try and get me out of, or find an excuse to actually get rid of me from my post. But they couldn't do that because I'd actually take some advice from a professor. And if anybody wants to kind of look at a great TEDx on corporate psychotherapy, Professor Clyde Boddy does a great TEDx. And I'd watch that by sheer coincidence. I'd watched that before I went for the meeting. And I thought, I'm going to contact him. And I did. And he gave me two pieces of advice. One was to take a witness with me. And the other part of advice was to become a detached witness, which is very, very hard to do. So don't get emotionally embroiled within the questioning, because that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to trigger you to actually lose control, say something that you shouldn't. And crikey, it's hard, especially when somebody's attacking you and your decision making. And at that point, kind of 28, 29 years of police service. So it's hard not to get embroiled. And I remember one comment that the senior leader made. He said, this is like actually having a no comment interview. And it was that much of a tightrope that and I couldn't speak afterwards. I just kind of broke down after the interview, after he'd left the room. It was quite an emotional kind of 2 hours. So I learned a lot from that. I probably became quite bitter after that, should we say, disengaged with work, didn't want to be there. How could somebody who you're trying to help and trying to help the organization do this to you? And this is what we see, and this is what I've seen since, is a lot of people who experience bullying kind of go back into the shadows. Right, I'm just going to work 8 till 4, should we say, as an example, do what's on the role profile, go home at night and survive. And yes, I was at the end of my career, so survival was a police pension, a very healthy police pension at the end of it, which gave me stability, the family stability. But the trouble is, when you start receding back into yourself, you harm yourself. You don't harm the person that is, or your perceived bully. You just harm yourself. You harm your family around you because you're not who you are, in terms of that buoyancy and helping, and you become, I'm trying to think of the word there, kind of, you go into yourself. You certainly don't help the colleagues at work who you've loved and worked with very closely within air support. So after leaving the police service, I was asked to do some psychometrics from a wonderful guy in South Africa, guy called Junior Shkoman. And crikey, it opened me up to understand why I was vulnerable to being bullied and why the bully bullied. And that's something that we don't always appreciate. Why is that person being so destructive, should we say, when you're there to help? So how do those two elements kind of conflict and cause so much damage, really? And we look at complexity and how I dealt with complexity. So I'm a more of a non-linear thinker. So I see a bigger picture. I don't like injustice either, because I saw the injustice being done to my colleagues. So I stood up and fought. And I think some of that comes from my mother as well. But bless her. And so you throw yourself at it, when actually, looking back, knowing who I am, having an idea in context as to who my perceived bully was, I would change the tactic, strategy, however you want to mold it, to actually get my point across. And sometimes, and this is the hardest thing that I've had to learn, you have to step back and away for your own safety, your own health, your own physical health, your own financial health, and all that is embroiled within your family as well. So there's a decision to make in these things, that which route do I take? Do I go kind of full on through the front doors and in a way kind of attack the problem, or do you look for more subtle ways to actually do it? Just set seeds, to throw in ideas and see how they kind of work out, shall we say, or conclude. So yeah, I think knowing myself now, I would do things far differently with experience as well. That comes with it, and hopefully a little bit more wisdom. But knowing who you are is critical, and very few people do. That's the thing.
What advice would you give to someone who's trying to find who they are and and is just really, really struggling at work. And part of, the step to overcoming those challenges, finding out who they are, what they want, what they believe, and what is the best step for them going forward.
Yeah. For me, it was via the psychometrics because it was my data. And what we do, we use a suite of, they're not tests, they're assessments, because you're not testing against anything because it's who you are. But it's like a gamification, which was weird. And I'd done psychometrics before, and I thought, oh, go on, then I'll do it. I've just retired, so I've got some time on my hands. But it just kind of blew me away because we look at things like the eyesight. You think, oh, what's that going to do with it? Well, how you see, your peripheral vision, night blindness, color blindness, that all impacts it because that's your main way of actually absorbing information into the brain. So then we look at cognitive processing. How do you think? How's your speed of cognition as well? But also how you deal with complexity. That's a key thing. And complexity is broken down into four elements. Those that can deal with the simple, uncomplicated work, shall we say, or surroundings or environment. Those that can work in a complicated arena. Those can work with complexity, where there's no knowns. So you've got to start from afresh. But also those that are able to work in a chaotic situation, which is basically that's 4% of the population. And there's only 20%, there's 20% of people can work in that complex, chaotic arena, that environment. So understanding where you fit into that, and everybody is required. We need all those spectrums of complexity across an organization and across society to make it work, and government as well. I'm sure you've seen that. But we'll then look at how we deal with stress as well. And we're going to have a deeper look at somebody, their mental well-being. Are they in a state of burnout? Are they approaching it? Or are they actually, and this is what I found myself in going back to the bullying, I'm in a state of cruising, that I'm just doing the bare minimum to keep myself out of trouble, but not dip in performance and try and keep that balance, but not being who I am. Because that leads to frustration in itself. Because if I find out I was kind of quite creative and I like solving problems, if you see something that I've got the answer to that, or I give potential solution that I'd like to add to the mix. If you don't do that, you're just keeping it in and frustrated, and you walk away thinking, I could have done something then, or could have added to the conversation or the dialogue. So it's all those elements we put together because we are mind, body, and soul. They're all working in tandem with one and each other. They're all bouncing off each other. So how does the mind work? How does the information come in? How do we deal with the information? How do we process it? And how do we then deal with the stress as well? And that's certainly something in policing and well, any profession really. When do we reach that point of stress, that we reach that tipping point that, yeah, I need to come back from that point? So that is, I mean, that's probably blowing our own trumpet here, but it's different. But it's understanding yourself with your own data. Yes, there's an element of personality, but what we say with that is that that personality is built up over perhaps the last 6 to 12 months, because that's a fluid thing. And this is what most psychometrics do. They box you off into a blue, green, whatever. You are this type of personality, but you're not. You're changing perhaps with me, you'll change with your family, you'll change with your colleagues, you'll change when you're meeting clients, change when you're on Saturday night or whenever. We're constantly in a fluid kind of state of flux, and it's understanding those intricacies and our mental well-being on top of that that's key.
So your role with the Shropshire Police
Yeah.
as an organisational development advisor, what strategies did you implement to promote positive change within the organisation?
Yeah, I was lucky because I came back to my home force. So, as you say, I was working in London till March, where are we now? 2019, I think it was. And I was going to retire in July. That's bang on my 30 years. So I did 2 or 3 months within that. But then I came back, not as a police officer, but as a civilian member of staff for a program of change, which was a digital transformation. But I used my crew resource management training and delivery within the police service, because my main role as the business change manager for the digital transformation was engaging with those people that were having the change implemented on. That sounds, I don't like the sound of that, because they should be engaged from the very start. They should be part of the solution and not just saying, right, here's a change, get on and deal with it, which can be a bit of a police thing, because it's that hierarchical, right, here's the change, we're going to give you a week's training. Now you've all got the training, you can all go on and work with it, and there won't be a problem. But there's that gap between reality and expectations, and that was too far kind of away from each other. So I basically, the time I had, because I came into the project a year after it had been started, was to try and get people on board, do sessions with them, use some of the training tips and training exercises to just try and bring people closer together and understand. At this point, you have to remember, I wasn't working with the psychometrics, so I didn't have the appreciation of what I have now. I've learned a huge amount since I've left the police service, but using the police service as a, shall we say, an apprenticeship to some extent. It's a long one, but an apprenticeship it kind of was. So I think by look more than anything, those the people that I managed to engage and speak to were via those, again, human factor elements that I brought from police aviation.
Could you tell us about your experience working in high threat environments abroad and training air crew and police officers? And how did you manage to deal with that mentally? And were you given any support to deal with that? Because you are probably seeing a lot of traumatic things that would obviously, affect anybody.
Yeah, there's a lot in there, isn't there? When I first became involved with air support back in, I think it was 2000, 2001, by pure chance, actually. And I know I still wanted to fly and learn to fly, but I was on traffic at the time, and I had a pursuit when I was on the traffic section with a motorcyclist. It was quite comical, actually. And we managed to, careful what I say here, trap the motorcyclist very safely between two police cars. And so he was sat up, bolt upright, with two police cars kind of pinning him in. And we arrested him. He was absolutely fine. And I didn't realise that the police helicopter was above us. So my colleague and I said, well, we'll go and get the video from the air unit, which was in the south of the county. It was a nice sunny afternoon. And the person who showed me around their brand new helicopter then just kind of set a fire going, and they said, oh, come down and do a shift with us. So just one thing led to another, and then I became an observer, as it was in those days, on the air unit, and then permanently, and then I became the sergeant and then the unit executive officer latterly, towards the end of kind of 2015 it was by then. Anyway, one thing with that position came with the training role, which I'd never done training really to that point. So I learned training as a result of getting the role, which when you look back and you look at trainers, is totally the wrong thing to do, because just because I'm a sergeant doesn't make me a good trainer. It's a weird thing. So there's certain traits, we say, that trainers should have. Communication's one thing. Again, that ability to deal with humans and that personal interactions as well, and look at people in a more personal way. But from there, I took on the training role, and I loved it, to be honest. Certainly the human factors. And going back to that, I think that's probably me looking after people after they've been in traumatic events. And yes, you're right, they did see some horrific things. I just relate back to London. I was on duty when Grenfell occurred, I wasn't flying, but the crews were all night since it tragically started. And I remember one member of the crew, he went back with another aircraft. So he spent 4 or 5 hours looking at the scene of Grenfell, which is hugely traumatic. And it's knowing who your staff are and knowing when they need that support and when they need that time out, and to say enough's enough. Yeah, I appreciate, again, going back to that help and that morality at the start, want to help each other as a human. There's sometimes you need to take people out of the equation just for their own sake. And then after that, certainly the police service now is getting better. I don't think it's totally there yet in terms of what they call trauma risk incident management, TRIM. There's a lot more that could be done to understand, rather than after something's happened, to work out the build-up, because it affects trauma, affects people with PTSD, affects people differently. We all have a different way of coping with it, understanding it, and how we vent it. Or some people will explode for no apparent reason. Something's actually triggered it, or somebody will absorb it, and then fall over. But then so many people will just process it almost immediately after the event and then move on. So it's understanding the individual again. There's no silver bullet to that. It needs to be tailored to the individual. And I think hopefully the police service and other organised emergency services can get to that point, that we know who you are. We've got a user manual of who you are. We know how you're going to deal with trauma. So we can actually prevent it rather than waiting for the behavioural aspects to surface, by which time it's too late. That we need to get. And there's a great quote by Nelson Mandela. Sorry, it's not Nelson Mandela at all. It is Desmond Tutu, that we need to get upriver and find out why people are falling into the river. Because at the moment, all we're doing is pulling people out of the river. We need to understand what's causing them to fall in, and even throwing themselves in, sadly, at the moment. And that's when we start looking at people taking their own lives. We need to get up the river to understand the individual and how they react to these situations, and how can we better prepare them and give them that self-awareness so they can self-manage, hopefully, their own mental health and well-being. So we don't get to a lot of people, a lot of good people falling into the river. And that means long-term sickness, that means problems at home as well, mental health and also physical health, because those two are intrinsically joined together.
What was it like guarding President Obama during state visits, and how did that experience shape your perspective on security and leadership?
Wow. Yes, it was a big thing for me, because you have to remember, I came from a county force into literally the Met. It was the Met's unit, Metropolitan Police, and I was seen as very much an outsider. I'd never dealt with anything like that. Yes, I'd been on air support for 12, 15 years by then. So I thought I'd seen most things and dealt with most things. But to be involved, I would say, with something so huge, I'd never come across that in my whole career. It was amazing, to be honest. And I was just a very small cog, and a cog that was learning. Thankfully, I had great people around me in terms of our senior pilots and other two base managers who'd been through that. They knew the protocol to follow. And in a way, I kind of shadowed people during that week. Conversations with the Civil Aviation Authority, conversations with the air unit that flies, or the marine unit that fly the president, the intricate plans, and also within the Met, you've got that hub of decision making, and it's a huge hub based of all different elements you would think imaginable for such a visit. The security of it, the firearms, the traffic, the media, the army are involved, the ambulance service, fire service, all these intricate kind of pieces of the jigsaw coming together, and the police managing that, and it was amazing to actually watch and just be part of. That's a very, very proud moment actually, and it's quite nerve-wracking to think I can't get anything wrong here, because one thing kind of can lead to a chink in the chain, as it were, of all these things that are going on. So being in the right place at the right time, with the right aircraft, with the right fuel, with the right people on board, knowing where you're going. We had a big rehearsal with the Marine Corps a week, 2 weeks before he actually arrived as well. Then you've got to take contingencies. If the weather's not fit to fly, then there's other means of actually getting in from the airport to where he was staying in London. So all these factors and all this planning, months of planning, having the right aircraft, and police aircraft and helicopters are a complex thing in themselves. They can go wrong at a moment's notice, but it's all to do with the amount of hours they've got left to fly on. So we had to have a certain amount of hours left to fly before they went for services. So it's all so many factors kind of coming together. The right hours for the pilots, the right duties to have. So it's very complicated. And to see that all come together was, I was lucky to be there, to be honest, and part of it. That's what I take away from it. And something I'd never experienced before and be able to learn from. And again, going back to your point in leadership there, it's not just the leaders at the top, it's leaders all the way down the chain. And that's leaders who are, you think, oh, they're just a PC. They are leading at times and have to have that ability to do it in an aircraft, to see something and react to it, and for that message to go down the chain so somebody at the top can make a better informed decision is key. So leadership isn't a title. That's the thing. Leadership is something that you do and have to do at certain times. And thankfully, I worked with some fantastic people down there that certainly had that.
I've noticed when I was reading the question, your face just lit up and you're smiling. It
You
must
took
have
me
been
back.
really rewarding.
It was, yeah. And you can get a little bit blasé about it. That's the weird thing, because you're involved in these high-level events in London. The people I work with, oh, we've done this before, we do X, Y, Z, do that, speak to them, sort that out. And you think, crikey, how did you get to that? And learning kind of by osmosis, really, from those people that have done it before was, again, fascinating, really. And I'd never been involved in anything like that before. So, and to go home and people saying, what, you were looking after Obama, what were you doing there? And relate to them. But you can think, well, it was just our job. We had to do it. That's what we do. But to somebody else looking outside in, it's absolutely fascinating. And this is something that I kind of ensured when I was the base manager down in London, is that the crews of the aircraft were doing some amazing things every day, be it catching criminals, finding people, preventing things. And that became the norm, if that makes sense. So what I ensured I did, as most days when I got into the office, was look at what jobs had occurred and put like a mention on their kind of personal record to say, you did this, you did this, you did this, because we can forget about it so easily. And there's a normality of, oh, you went to another armed robbery. Oh, you went to another and found somebody, or we found someone on the train tracks, or whatever, or saved somebody's life. You can get a little bit blasé that that's the norm, and it should never be the case. They're doing some amazing work, finding people in the Thames as well. Some amazing footage that we had of they would have died if the aircraft had not been there and the crew's not been there. So yeah.
Even like listening to it, it's like I noticed that I'm going into like, oh my God, like this is so fascinating. This is quite amazing. And yeah.
I was lucky.
Yeah.
I consider myself, or my whole career, to be very lucky to have joined their support when I did. And you look back and it was almost pure fluke. If that helicopter hadn't been above when we were having that pursuit with the motorcyclist in a place called Cannock, then I might not have got down to the A unit and had that invite with the right pilot who was enthusiastic about what he did and what this new aircraft was capable of, and inviting me down. It's those kind of junctions in life, isn't it, that you go left or right, and they can lead to one thing or another. So I just consider myself highly lucky to have trodden the path that I did, should we say. And
That sounds
make me fantastic people along the way. It's people that make it.
amazing. How did you approach writing a book? Speak up, listen down, and what message did you hope to convey to your readers?
There were several reasons I wrote it, primarily for my daughters, to be honest, and to capture, as we've just been outlining, some of those events that I went through along 30 years of fascinating career and very fortunate career. I just wanted to put some of it down in the book to actually have a legacy for them, to be honest. They could look back and I'm sure they didn't even appreciate or know, well, why would they, exactly what I did and when I did it and for what reasons. And yeah, in the book, how I changed across those years as well, undoubtedly. But part of it was to outline the experience of bullying and what I'd learned since that as well, and how people can actually look after themselves as part of that process. Because there's a lot of it about, and I think that's the reality. And there's a lot of bullying and toxicity about for different reasons as well. It's a complicated environment that people work and face. And it was to capture some of that. And actually, there's a different way of actually looking after people, looking after ourselves. And that stems from the ability to know ourselves. Because once you start knowing yourself, you start appreciating other people around you and what qualities and talents that they've got to offer as well. And we haven't got all the answers ourselves. So how do we bring those people in and give them a voice as well?
What advice would you give to aspiring leaders within large organizations based on your experience and observations?
I think going back to the previous question, the previous answer is knowing yourself, knowing who you are, knowing how you deal with complexity, knowing when the next promotion will be the tipping point. And actually, I'm being inadvertently forced into a state of, or going from a competent state to an incompetent state. So how do I guard against that? Where do I know that I'm actually having fun here in my job? I love it. I've got the people around me. We're doing some good. Have I got the capabilities to deal with the complexity of the next level of my promotion? And what we can do as well now with the psychometrics is actually guard against those people that are looking for promotion, and they're out there that are looking for promotion for the wrong reasons, that it's themselves that are at the heart of it. It's kudos, it's power, it's narcissism, basically, and that kind of corporate psychopathy. How do we guard against those people going or rising and catching it at an early level to actually help them as well? But knowing, just going back to the very start there, it's knowing who you are, knowing your capabilities, and knowing how far to push them. And if you are, who are the people that you desperately need to help support you? So that's my top tip, knowing yourself.
That seems to be a common theme from what you're saying, and we're going to talk about that in more detail in a bit. So, how would you define workplace bullying and toxicity, and how do they impact individuals or organizations?
That's a mammoth question. You see, bullying comes in so many guises. It can be subtle. It can be that kind of death by 1,000 cuts. That is it me that's the problem here? And actually that kind of gaslighting and pushing the problem back. Because I think most people think bullying is that kind of thumping the table, abusing somebody even physically and mentally, which is an open element, but it can be so subtle. We've had people that have actually didn't realize they were actually constructively dismissed. It's that kind of chipping away at people, that undermining their confidence, undermining their ability, and questioning it, and they'll move on. When actually, in fact, they've actually been constructively dismissed from an organization. So it's not always that open, aggressive behavior. I've found that with my experience, and I can only relate to mine, and I can't put myself in other people's shoes because I don't know what they are. I can have an idea, but as an individual, I can only kind of express what I went through. And as I said earlier, is that I thought I was helping the organization. I thought I was putting forward a solution that had had some worth to it, should we say, and that could have solved the problem. But instead, I got battered and bruised because of it. Now, when I look at that person who I perceived as the bully, I can see potentially the context that they were in. Over promoted, they couldn't have somebody at a lesser rank than them giving them solutions, as it was seen as a challenge and a threat to them, when in fact I had no intention of going any higher in the ranks than what I wanted to. God, I loved where I was. I loved the people around me, so I wasn't going to go any higher. But you can be seen as a threat and a challenge, so you will get or become the target of a bully. Well, because of two reasons. One, because they've got that narcissistic tendency, and they enjoy seeing people suffer and squirm and kind of move to their tune or dance to their tune, however you want to put it. But there are those that, as stated earlier, that are over promoted, who default to, well, I am this leader, I have got this title, you'll do as you're told, rather than saying, folks, I need your help here. I can't solve this on my own. I need you to be part of it. So how are we going to solve this problem together? And that's, for me, is the healthy way that organizations need to work, with a shared awareness between the teams. Who needs support? Who's got that creative nature? Who can think quickly? Who needs more time to go away and actually process what's gone on to come back with an even better solution or add to the dialogue? And it's understanding everybody at a human level of what their talents are to bring to the table. Because then we get that collaboration, we get that, as we talked about earlier, psychological safety is an organic thing rather than do A, B, C, and D, and we get that. It's through that vulnerability, through that trust, through that honesty and openness, then we get that real thriving organizations.
What are some common signs and consequences of workplace bullying and toxicity?
Again, I can only go through what I saw. There's the obvious, almost physical, tangible elements, such as people being disengaged with the work. Their performance will dip. They won't get involved. There's certainly sickness, and I saw people, and I kind of suffered in terms of mental well-being, but other people had heart attacks, should we say. Other people had mental breakdowns. I was lucky where I was because I wasn't at the hub of the National Police Air Service. I was at one of the Surrey satellite stations. So there's a distance, a physical distance. So if I knew this person was coming, I could make myself scarce. I could kind of work my way around it, not to actually come in contact with them. But others weren't so fortunate because they were at the headquarters in Wakefield. So there's far more chance of that kind of targeting and actual chipping away at somebody's mental wellness, really, at the end of the day. So that's the physical and openly visual elements. What you will also see is, and this is with me, you start becoming withdrawn in yourself, and you start questioning yourself, and you start doubting yourself. Is it me that's the problem, or is it the other person? And that can have a huge detrimental effect into your mental well-being, because a lot of it is unseen. That's the thing. It's not the scene that does the main damage. It's what's happening in your mind, which will lead to physical deterioration. I had stomach problems as a result, and I still say that was a direct effect of what was happening at work. But also your relationships as well with other people. You become withdrawn and not who you want to be or who you were. So it's a multifaceted kind of problem, and I think sometimes we're too reliant on the physical, behavioural, visual signs of bullying when we can actually again get upstream and find out who this person is in terms of the bully and in terms of the person being bullied and work that out. A lot of it could be addressed very early on because it's poor communication. It's different people with different perspectives, unaware of what their perspectives are or how they're looking at a problem and solving it, come together. So that brings conflict with it. Certainly if you get this hierarchical element that one person sits at a different level than somebody else. I can't have somebody, as I say, telling me how to do it and give me solutions when I'm paid X amount to give those solutions. And it's changing that conversation. It's changing that narrative that actually the leader is there just to provide, but actually to develop an environment that actually allows those people to think and to actually thrive themselves with the talents that they have.
Could you share some insights from your book on recognizing and addressing workplace bullying and toxicity?
Yeah, I've touched on one element, and that was the advice I gave or had from Professor Clive Boddy. The biggest piece of advice I would give is to stand still. And that sounds a strange thing to say, is to, if you think you're being bullied, is just to stand still and look at what's around you, what's happening, what's the evidence, how do I put this situation into context? Is it me? Have I, and it sounds awful, but have I antagonized the situation, which I thought I had done to some extent? And if I'd had a different philosophy, a different strategy, I could have worked my way around it in a far healthier and safer way. So to take a step and try and get that clarity of the environment, the people around you, to actually make sense of what's happening to you and seek advice, because this is another thing as well. And this is what we find in the work we're doing, is that people aren't alone in those experiences. In a bullying situation, you tend to think that this is only happening to me. How can I actually approach somebody else? They're just going to kind of, well, certainly not going to support me. But there are other people, there will be other people actually going through similar circumstances and similar experiences. So have a look. And again, that standing still to actually take on board, absorb what's going on around you so you can make the best decision. The best decision might be to actually leave. And that sounds kind of defeatist. And I think to some extent, I thought that just to back away now is defeatist. And again, I had some counselling after my experience, and the counsellor asked me that question. I said, well, my mum wouldn't have done that. And bearing my mum passed away kind of 20 years ago now, but I've still got the values that she would have held. And one of them would have been to stand up and fight for those moral kind of values that you have. But sometimes for your own health, your family's health, finance, sometimes you've just got to look for an escape route. And that sounds, again, defeatist and quite harsh. But if the risk and the risk benefits don't add up, or the benefits to carry on, then there's a decision to be made. But these are emotional things we're dealing with. So sometimes that clarity to stand out and actually remove the emotion is such a hard thing to do. And that's where that support, talking to people, understanding who you are again is critical.
Sorry,
That's right.
are there any legal or policy measures in place to address workplace bullying and toxicity? If so, how effective are they?
People, there's some really, really passionate people that I know and work with. Lady called Nikki Eyre for Conduct Change. They're trying to get through Parliament at the moment legislation to actually define bullying, and that there are ways. And I'm not the expert on this, and it's people like that who are probably better to talk to. There are elements within law that you can actually adopt for it, but there's not that clarity. So there are some passionate people, and there are moves afoot, shall we say, to get legislation. There is I don't think that legislation is the answer in all honesty. I think it's part of the answer, but I think what I've seen of bullying, there's some very, very clever people who bully, certainly in terms of the narcissism. So they will find ways around it. They will kind of hide under current legislation, and I was doing it because of this, or I was given the remit to actually change this team, change this organization. And yes, I was a little bit, shall we say, aggressive on occasions, but look at the business now. And certainly in policing, what I found was there's a certain protectionism as well for people like that as well, which is slightly worrying, shall we say. But going back to your point, legislation is coming along at some point to actually define it. It's part of the solution, but that is almost the one end of the spectrum, shall we say. People have had to have gone through a huge amount of trauma, personal, career, family, to actually then lean on the legislation. Will it deter people from bullying? I'm not 100% sure, but that's why on the other end of the spectrum, we need to start looking upriver, upstream, as to why people are falling in and who those potential narcissists and potential bullies, and protecting people from becoming a bully and helping them, support them. It just sounds, again, a strange thing to say, because a lot of people will just want retribution and kind of their pound of flesh, shall we say. But there's better ways of doing it. It's part of the solution.
What role does effective leadership play in addressing and preventing workplace bullying in toxicity and toxicity?
Yeah, it's huge. It's the leadership that is creating a lot of these instances and creating a lot of those environments, sadly. And again, it goes back to this, so many people are over promoted. I think Deloitte put it at plus 80% of people are poorly selected and therefore ineffective. And that's not just one leader. If you think of a leader in a team, that permeates around them. There's a ripple effect around them. So that's creating that disengagement and conflict. So it's knowing who they are. And what we see, and also we see in policing, is that leaders see themselves as the people to solve the problem. If they were to accept me vulnerable, that actually I'm part of the problem as well here. I can't just come in and solve the problem. There's no silver bullet, as I've mentioned before. They are part of the problem. So until they look at themselves and see what part they're playing, then we're going to, as I keep saying, kind of throwing darts in the dark at these things. And it's always interesting when something goes wrong, and you've probably seen it in health and policing and fire service, is I'm going to come in, I'm going to change the culture. Okay, right. What that says to me is that I don't really have the right, I haven't got a clue of what's happening and what the problem is, but I'm going to change the culture. So where are you going to start from? Where are the hotspots? What are those individual experiences people are having? What's the baseline to work from? Because if you haven't got a baseline to work from in terms of that rebuilding the culture or environment, how do you measure that you've changed it? You'll always have a culture, be it good, bad, indifferent, productive, thriving, flourishing, whatever. But how do you measure it? And then how do you actually make the changes? And this is what we go to. We change the experiences for people. We don't change behavior. Behavior is a byproduct of changing the environment, because all too often we're reliant on behavior. Behavior is a symptom of something that's going on far deeper. So until we go back 2, 3, 4, 5 steps to find the root causes of that behavior in the experiences they're having, we can't tell somebody, oh, you need to be more empathetic. Yes, you need to trust me. It's just lip service and words. Until we understand the experiences people are having there and then in that current workplace, good, bad, or different, we've got a baseline to work from and a baseline to monitor and make those changes. Does that make sense?
It makes
It's
complete sense.
There's a different perspective on things, shall we say?
And that's what like this podcast is about, is finding out about different perspectives and understanding why people come from where they're coming from.
Yes.
How can individuals support their colleagues who may be experiencing workplace bullying or toxicity?
Yes, and again, it goes back, doesn't it? That you're not on your own sounds a bit. Should we say it's again, until you know who you are and the experiences you're having at the time. So many people at the moment are in burnout. We hear of it a lot. So there's so many people just fighting for their own space and fighting survival. That means they're looking inward. They're not looking outward at their colleagues. We need to change that whole environment that actually, yeah, I'm happy with what I'm doing. You're not happy. Why is your experience a negative one? How am I contributing to that negative experience if you're a leader? So how do we change that experience for you? So it's reaching out, but we hear of peer support and things like that. This all has a time and a space for that. But until we get people understanding what's happening to them, then they can start looking outward. Because at the moment, there's far too many people fighting for their careers, fighting for promotion, over-promoted, as we've said, that are actually looking inward. They're not looking at their colleagues. And if you start looking at narcissism, those colleagues are there for them to use and get to the next tier, the next level, the next rank, which is just going to harm them even more. So until we get people understanding who they are, what they're experiencing, having context to that, then they start appreciating other people and then start talking to them and sharing awarenesses. And that's the big thing that we're doing with the work, with what we're branding as Humanics, which will be out in the new year, is that bringing teams together, having a non-judgmental, and that's key, a non-judgmental focus on what's happening to them through those experiences. And then people can, we've seen it happen already in mediation. Well, I didn't realize that. I didn't realize that you didn't feel supported. I didn't realize that you didn't accept criticism like that. So I'll approach it in a different way. And it's non-judgmental. So it's not pointing fingers. You're not doing this, you're not doing that. Your ability or competence is not what it should be. It's what is the central point is the focus on the experience. So that can be, again, two people looking at it from the different sides of the room, but having a central focus. And then they start talking. Sorry, one last thing. What we found when you do this and they present the data, which is their data, it's not mine. I haven't created it. They start talking. And it's a simple thing. People start talking and people start finding their own solutions. So it's just facilitated by the data. The data helps create the stories. And it's a really, really powerful thing. And I've seen it in Europe when we worked over there. One person we knew before we went into the room was suffering. They were on, well, the data said they were in total burnout, and you could see it. You knew who that person was. You didn't need a name or a sex or a color or anything like that. You know who that person is. And there was a subtle thing on the day 2 of the offsite that we did. Somebody simply put a hand on the shoulder, and if you were looking the wrong way, you wouldn't have seen it. But through the dialogue they'd had, the work they'd done together, the shared awareness they'd got, there was just a hand on a shoulder to say, we've got you, you're part of the team. And you can see those moments occur. And it can be quite emotional for that person as well, because they realize that they're not alone, that we're going to help you through this. Come and talk to me. Come and explain what's happening. Somebody to listen to, not even give solutions to. actually just to listen and vent what's going on to them and around them.
Are there any external resources or support networks available for individuals dealing with workplace bullying or toxicity?
There are, as I say, I linked in with Conduct Change and MTICBIAI, but there are avenues. I don't know them all in detail, but there's some marvelous people out there trying to help people who've been affected by it. Likewise with ourselves, with the work we're doing with the psychometrics and understanding, that's how I got through it, is understanding myself to actually give context as to why it happened. And I think that's a big thing as well. A lot of counselling and a lot of interventions don't seek out the root cause of why the bullying occurred. So you're left with it. If you go for a session, you're left with the same thoughts, the same problems you had when you went in, because all they've sadly done is taken you back to the event, which has triggered you back to what you felt and what you went through during that time of quite, well, for a lot of people, it's a very dark time for them. And worst case scenario, people have taken their lives quite regularly in terms of that workplace bullying that we see and hear of. So just going back, really, there are some wonderful people out there that will help. What you need to find out is what are the best ones that are actually going to give you context as to heal. And this is what I went through, to understand and then to move on. And if necessary, and this is a harsh, kind of hard pill to swallow, is actually forgive the person that actually bullied you. If you can get to that point, then it's in the history. It's actually an event that you've learned from and actually grown stronger because of. And there's something called the theory of positive disintegration that we use by Dabrowski. And until you've been through a traumatic event, which is can be lots of different things, is then you don't start to understand and learn from it and become a different person or a stronger person because of it, because you appreciate and have context to the event that you've been through.
What specific qualities or skills should leaders possess to effectively combat workplace bullying and toxicity?
Don't know if it's combating it. For me, it's a more fundamental root cause issue. Is again going back to that knowing who you are. It's kind of replaying the record here. But if we can prevent it, I'm more interested in prevention of toxicity, shall we say, and workplace bullying, rather than dealing with the outfall of it. And if we're promoting the right people and supporting them, then we don't get it in the first instance. So going back to the days of policing, really, prevention was always better than cure. Yes, we can cure it. Yes, we can go into a team or go into an organization and look where the hotspots are and potential conflict areas are. But promoting people who have the right complexity potential to deal with the role, for me, is key, because then we can prevent it. And that means a lot of saved sickness, abstraction, and far better kind of creativity and innovation, because people are engaged, and that's a key thing.
In your role, what role does, I mean, in your opinion, what
Yes.
role does accountability play in leadership response to workplace bullying and toxicity?
Accountability. Yes. Again, going back to my experiences within empaths, what happened, and this is probably a great example for non-accountability, shall we say, is that several of us were asked to become whistleblowers and actually provide evidence as to the behaviour and what had happened to us as a result of this senior leader. So we were all given questionnaires to provide, and the evidence was damning, really. And it was far more than I thought. And I tried to put this bigger picture together to who I'd spoken to and join some of the dots, shall we say, and I provided a lot of evidence. However, what we see is organizations protecting themselves against the outfall of bullying. And what should have happened, without a shadow of a doubt, this person should have gone to a disciplinary hearing, which is a public event. And the details come out, and the sanction for that could have been that person losing the job. For me, the evidence was dumbed down. So it went to a disciplinary meeting, which means it was behind closed doors. And the greatest sanction there was a final written warning, which this person, I believe, had. So they were moved sideways. Nobody, to my knowledge, and I certainly didn't have any kind of face-to-face or detailed debrief as to my allegations that I'd made or any allegations that have been upheld or not upheld. And I was left in the dark. I still don't know. Nobody's actually spoken to me about that. And I know others, that's the case as well. And this person was then promoted twice again by this force to take up quite a senior leadership position in the UK, actually. And then I got a message from somebody saying, actually, this person is continuing to bully and cause people's to have a miserable life, anxiety, and off with stress. And you think that is accountability towards senior leadership within this country of police leadership, because they had responsibility for a lot of people, but by dumbing it down, trying to hide it, trying to mask it, trying to save their own credibility, because this person, if you think about it, was the wrong person for the wrong role, but they've hired them. So it actually, shall we say, goes back to their ability to hire the right person. They've chosen the wrong person because of what the damage they've done. So they don't want that to come out. So it gets dumbed down and dumbed down, but all the time, this person goes on to higher levels. If this person had gone and changed, had actually learnt, so shall we say again, that theory of positive disintegration, if they'd learnt from that experience and been a better person for it, then absolutely fine, great. That is a positive result. But to then go on to be promoted and continue with that type of behavior, that destructive behavior, is just appalling. And basically what happened, in a nutshell, they were shown the side door before any further negative media was covered on that particular story. So they've left with a very, very nice pension and final salary, when they've left basically carnage and devastated lives behind them. And that is the sad part of this, to be honest. Sad part of the story that I was involved in, because it could have been dealt with a long time before that, without anybody else being harmed. And I think they've got that on their kind of CV, should we say, that they didn't deal with something, when these senior leaders want to be there. They're paid a lot of money to be in that position, but don't accept that accountability, that it comes with difficult decisions. And that was one of them that they did very, very badly, to be honest.
What steps can people in leadership positions take to ensure that employees feel safe and supported when reporting incidents of workplace bullying or toxicity?
There's several methods there. Again, if you can get to prevention, that's even better, that you're not having to deal with whistleblowing or people bringing up these negative aspects of their workplace experiences. There's companies that you can actually use in terms of data gathering, should we say, that you've got a problem, and I think the NHS use it. I'm trying to think of the name of the organisation. Trust Workplace, I think it is, or Speak Up, or something like that. There's several companies you can use that actually can, and then you have a counsellor and you have people to talk to that if you want to, but it's all done anonymously, that you can bring these things up. What we do is prevent that by having that shared awareness, coming into teams, using the data they produce, which we use Humanics, which is to say the new brand of the 10-minute insight that we can get from an individual and how that impacts on a team. So if you can understand the dynamics of a team and how people interact and what space they're in at the time, then you can start preventing those problems downstream. So that's what we're working towards. It's new, it's taking some time to leverage, but when we've seen it in action and we've used it several times now in several teams, it's eye-opening when you gather the data and see what's happening behind the masks, we say, because people will always say, won't they, how are you? Oh, yes, I'm fine, thank you. And that's end of the story. But there's a huge amount going on in terms of the subconscious mind and problems at home that are coming to work and problems at work are going to home as well. And we're very, very complex systems. We're probably the most complex system in any system, and that's the individual human. Until we get an insight to that, sadly, we're going to get more and more of the whistleblowing because people are in a bad space in terms of their mental well-being. Getting ahead of the danger, that's what we need to do.
And I feel like it's like it's like in really, really hot countries where it becomes unbelievably hot, where it's like starts like forest fires and stuff like that. Before that, they'll be like, okay, this weather's coming up. We're gonna say no barbecues in parks and stuff like that to prevent the fires.
Yeah,
And without that, everybody's like, oh, it's hot. Our country's usually hot. It'll be fine. And then because there was no warnings or something, as forest fires are beginning to happen.
yeah.
And it's not natural. It's man-made. And I feel like people often don't want to address the systematic issues that may contribute to workplace
Yes.
bullying
Yeah.
and toxicity. So what do you think how can leaders actively monitor and address any underlying systematic issues that may contribute to workplace bullying and toxicity?
Great analogy. I love the analogy. I'll pinch that one for the future. But how do they need to, for me, they need to listen. And we talk about communication, but listening is a skill that, and listening to understand, not just listening for listening's sake or listening to actually make a comment. It's listening to understand. But again, we get to this point that we need to know that the leader as such is in a good space in terms of their mental well-being. Are they in the right place? Have they been promoted to the right level? Have they got the right support? Because if they're happy in their lot, should we say, that's a very, very basic way of saying it, then they'll start looking out. And we see it time and time again, oh, you need to be empathetic as a leader. But if nobody's being empathetic towards them, are they going to be empathetic towards the people that they're leading? So we need to build these environments, and psychological safety is part of it, but where people can step forward and feel comfortable to talk. And it becomes the norm to actually open up and share these awarenesses and share the experiences that people are having. There was a program a long time ago. It was like The Undercover Boss. I don't know if you remember seeing that on ITV, where
Yeah.
the bosses basically didn't have a disguise and went to the shop floor and some of the departments in their business and truly found out what was going on. Why do you need to do that? I mean, to actually go to that extreme to find out what's happening in your business, that should be normal. We should be flattening these organizations to know what's going on and knowing which of the areas I need to focus on. Do we need training? Do we need interventions? Do we need just a listening ear to actually let them vent about what's happening? Because the solutions will be found on the shop floor. They have the solutions, and we have this kind of iceberg of ignorance where 100% of the problems and solutions sit on the ground floor or on the front line. They're dealing with the customer, they're dealing with the public, they know how to deal with it, and they have the solutions. What we tend to find is those at the top only see kind of 4%, I think it is, of what the problems are, because it gets filtered up to them. I can't tell the boss that. He'll think I'm not capable, so I'm not doing my job. So they kind of dress the figures up and dress what's going up. So by the time it gets to the very top, those critical decisions at the very top are made with only a small percentage of the information that's available. If we flatten organizations and find out what's happening on the ground floor without having to go in disguise and work with those people, and this is what we're doing with the psychometrics and those experiences again, you know what the problems are. So the solutions and the problems sit with those on the front line. How do you tap into that as a leader to make your life easier? And that's what we're promoting, and that's what we're doing at the moment. And it works. It works because people feel engaged in the solution, because at the moment they're not. They're just having change implemented on them without their voices being heard. And we can listen to every voice, not through the vocal element, but through the experiences that they're having.
What barriers might prevent employees from speaking up about incidents of bullying or toxicity?
Again, going back to mine, it's complex. There's people that said, "Oh, I'll get behind you, you carry on." And I kind of, my analogy of that is kind of leading people over the trench in World War One. You say, right, come on, we're going to fight the enemy, which is the bullying. Come on, let's go. The whistle's gone. We're all over the top. We're going together, and together we'll crack this. But then halfway across no man's land, you look back and there's nobody there, because they can't back you up because they've got their own careers to look after. Their mental health might not be in a good place to actually support you. They've got a family to support or children at school that they need the money for, the salary. They can't put that at risk. They've got no escape plan, that if it does go wrong and they become the focal point for being targeted, to get out safely. So it's a complex picture. So that's what I experienced. The people that you sometimes thought were going to support you couldn't, or they'd actually weighed the situation up for their own risk, because everybody kind of comes back to their own self-protection a lot of the time, that they don't come forward. They'll push you forward, but they won't support you when it comes to the crunch. So that's something, again, when that previous question that you asked, any tips if you do experience bullying, is, yeah, appreciate who that support is, and are they going to come with you, or are they going to just support you from the trenches, as it were, whilst you go over the top and attack the enemy, because it can be a very lonely place, sadly, and dangerous.
Very much so. How can organizations ensure that employees feel safe and protected whilst reporting incidents of bullying and toxicity?
I think I don't think there's one rule for everybody here. Again, it's knowing the individual and how they need supporting, and understanding what they're going through in terms of those experiences. How are they dealing with the stress? Are they a more non-linear thinker than a linear thinker? Do they see a bigger picture? Again, it's going into the micro details of who people are. There are strategies, I'm sure, in terms of those that are whistleblowers, and the one I went through in Wakefield, but it was never adhered to. As I say, I was never given any formal sit down. This is what's gone on. This is why we did this. This is the result. This is your allegations. That was found to be substantiated. That wasn't. So, yeah. So I'm lost the track of that question there, Rusmi.
It's okay. How
Yeah.
can organizations ensure that employees feel safe and protected when reporting incidents of bullying and toxicity?
Yes. I'm going to say that certainly from my experience, there was a policy, but it wasn't particularly well adhered to. As I say, I never had a debrief or one-to-one as to the eventual outcome of the decision making from, should we say, the professional standards, or from senior officers within Wakefield Police and sorry, not Wakefield Police, but West Yorkshire Police and the National Police Air Service. So there's one thing, again, it's that gap in reality, isn't it? Is that what's down on paper, and this is what should be adhered to in terms of policy of anonymity, not being continued to be bullied or harassed or anything like that. And I've got the policy somewhere, but ensuring that that is adhered to. You've written it down, that's your policy, but this is not what I've experienced. So why the gap? And I think that's important, because you get from that, don't you? This is the, well, for future people who want to kind of stand up and be counted, or stand up and be heard and have got problems, is that if they see the policy not being adhered to, well, it's no point in actually saying anything. So I'll just stay stum and say nothing and just protect myself and my family, and not bring to attention things that an organisation needs bringing to their attention. So it's important. And I think part of that, for me, if the policy had been followed to the letter, then the outcome for me, even though it was perhaps a negative one in terms of you don't always get the result that you're after, but at least the policy had been adhered to and the criteria had been followed, to give you confidence in it that actually, yeah, these are decisions. For this reason, we couldn't make that decision. For this reason, we made this decision. And that's that openness and transparency as well. But that then encourages people in the future and have the confidence to actually stand up and be listened to. Because if they, at this point in time, well, so-and-so went through that, I know all about that, it didn't go to anything, crikey, their health and well-being was worse off as a result of it, I'm not going to go that route. So I'm just going to just sit on my hands and do nothing. So if organisations want that confidence in the future, they've got to stick to the policy that they put down on paper, not play lip service to it.
Yeah. I'll tell you lots of examples of lip service. What
Yes.
resources or support systems should be in place to assist employees who speak up against workplace bullying or toxicity?
You see, if I look back at the West Yorkshire policy, I think it was there. That's the policy. Somebody's taken a lot of time to consider it and put it down on paper. But if you're not going to adhere to it, it's not worth anything. That's the thing. So I think the policies are there. It's how people, again, the complexity of the human factor and that unpredictability of the human factor. And who knows, there's potentially people over promoted within the professional standards. What pressure was being put on them by higher authorities or higher ranks to say, you will have this done this way. And they have to abide by bias and pressure, should we say. So I think the policies are there. It's how well are they adhered to when the moment comes. And it doesn't matter who actually is actually being prosecuted, the wrong word, but actually interviewed or looked at in terms of the bullying. If that's a chief constable, it's a chief constable. If it's a PC, it's a PC. And you've got that standardization, you've got that coherent way of dealing with people. But as long as that policy is adhered to, and that gives that universal kind of confidence in what they're doing. But it's not one rule for one person, one rule for another. But that can be seen to be the case within senior leadership, certainly I found, than rather than making examples of PCs, that's easier to do it and make people an example of, rather than the complication of it being a chief constable or senior officer. It's got to be the same.
How can leaders and managers effectively respond to reports of workplace bullying or I feel like I've asked that one. Have I asked that?
Say it again and I'll process it. How
can leaders and managers effectively respond to reports of workplace bullying or toxicity?
listen, sit down, listen. certainly, and also again, there's that word bias comes into this as well, that this person who's bringing forward a complaint or seeming to whinge, that's always a good one, isn't it? Certainly in the police service, the police are great at whinging. And but has this moment that this person's come forward, is this a genuine complaint? Has this person got a genuine story to tell that could actually aid the development of a unit of an organization? So take each one on its merits. That's for me, and to look around and get the context behind it. And we kind of go into that kind of crying wolf, don't we, sometimes, that, oh, so and so, they're always whinging, it's nothing. But actually the time that they do bring something up could be the time that they do need that support, they do need that attention. So take each moment on its merits. It's like, we used to go to a lot when I was a probationary constable in Stoke, that was a lot of missing people from children's homes. And you can get into that normality, oh, they've gone again, they've gone again. But the trouble is, the time that you get that mindset and don't give it the credence that it deserves, that could be the time that they've gone off and been groomed. They could have gone off with somebody that who's going to cause them harm. They could be in harm's way themselves for any number of reasons. So if you don't take it seriously from the point of contact, then it can lead to a lot of problems downstream. So take each event, take each person, take each complaint on its merits, and listen again.
Perfect. How can organizations ensure that employees are aware of the reporting mechanisms available to them for incidents of workplace bullying and toxicity?
Yeah, again, my experiences, they're all written down. I don't know what training, I'm sure initial stages of everybody's training within the police service, they will get some input from, say, the professional standards or whatever it's badged as these days. It does change, to understand their rights and what should happen. With regards to that, and again, it's all well and good training and giving people that awareness in the early stage of their career. Have they got the confidence in a role that they can't afford to lose? They're new to the role, new to the people around them, that they've got the confidence to actually, hang on a minute, that actually, I can do that now. 3 weeks, 4 weeks into the role, or 2 years into the role, and I know what to do. Have they got the confidence to actually employ those rights that they have? And again, analogy that we use is, there's so many great people coming into the police service at the moment, and it's the polishing fish analogy. I don't know if you ever heard of that one. Is that we're taking these shiny fish out of the pond and putting them into a murky pond. So what we want them to do is to change the cleanliness of the murky pond and make it nice, so we're not continually taking people out and back in and polishing them and putting them back in again. How do those new people coming in have the confidence ability to change the environment that they're going into, which in a team, within a department, within a shift, an organization, can be very murky, because people have been there a long time. They've got a lot of unhealthy practices, or sometimes illegal ones as well, that they actually acquiesce towards, rather than actually changing the pond they're going into. Does that make sense? But it's how do we change that gap? How do we get those people coming in to actually change the environment for the others, and actually be the conduit for a better organization for the future?
What steps can employees take to document incidents of workplace bullying or toxicity in order to support their claims?
Yeah, and that's key. Again, going back to experiences, there's perhaps regret not having written down some of the things that you think are inconsequential, that are just passing comments or passing instances. What I ended up doing was a huge spider map of the evidence in my case. And I just took that time to take a step back and to stop and thought, all these people, because in their support at the time, and I think this is what kind of not let them down, that they were a bit naive, is that we formed the National Police Air Service from kind of 23, 24, I think it was, bases throughout the country. But we'd also, in that time, we weren't kind of autonomous and silos. We talked to each other. So certainly as a trainer, we also had training meetings. So we knew each other. So from that, or part of the bullying, I'm sure, was like a divide and conquer. That I'll just speak to that unit, I'll speak to that unit, I'll put them in the place, I'll put them in the place. But the base managers and trainers talk to each other. Well, that happened here, that happened here. Crikey, that's the same thing. And going back to that, you're never alone on these things. This was never the case. So I drew up this huge spider map, and that was a way of evidencing those moments and those instances that all joined up in the end. And I think that's something on an individual, on a micro level, that you can quite easily do. Just to log, mention, and put down. It might not be relevant at the time, but it might build up a bigger picture for the future and builds up to that. And rather than looking back thinking, oh, if only I wish I'd made a note of a date and a time when that happened, I could have linked that to this, because it's a culmination, it's a continuation of the behavior or the behavior towards me. And it's resulted in me having to leave, or it's resulted in me being disciplined for something that's totally out of order or wrong, or that I vented in the end, or that just caused me to great stress or illness as well. So keep logging things down.
Perfect. 1 minute. I'm just sorting out one of the questions.
That's right.
It's
the water.
Actually, Lord. Can you share any insights from your book on how to bounce back from adversity in the workplace?
I was lucky. I went on to LinkedIn. I was quite vocal on there actually about the bullying. And going back to that, I was quite bitter really that my career ended like that. I didn't want it to end in that manner with that bitterness, because I thought I did a lot over the years. And that was when I thankfully connected with Junior over in South Africa, and he put me through the psychometrics. And that was the thing, I can hand on heart say, that was the thing that aided me to heal, to actually forgive at that time, actually, and to make sense and have context as to why I was bullied and why the bully bullied. There's two sides of the coin there. Is what did I actually contribute to actually trigger that other person? And what were the triggers for that other person, the context behind that person to why they bullied? Who knows what was going on in their home life? Were they over promoted? What pressures were being placed on them from even more senior leaders to say, you need to get this sorted? But also, I can't prove it because I'm not a medical person, but what element of narcissism played a part in that? For them to try and get to the highest level that they could within the police service at the expense of other people, and not just at the expense of other people, but their health and mental well-being, which to me, that is the greatest crime here, the people that suffered as a result. So kind of just going back to that, it was the metrics, understanding who I was, not personality, but who I was, for a number of reasons. That mind, body, and soul piece, that synergy between all of them, is to how I saw things, how I solved problems, how I communicated, how I looked at problems and the vision in terms of solutions and problems I had. And my inability to actually deal with injustice or try to seek justice for people who I'm more of a people person than an object person. So that element of empathy and helping people is there. So how does that have an impact? Because sometimes you think, oh, that's great. I can solve problems and I like seeing the bigger picture. That can be your Achilles heel because you jump up and down thinking, I've got a solution, I've got a solution. We could do this, we could do this. When sometimes it's a case of, as I said, taking a step back and saying, is it the right time? Is it the right people with the right people to communicate with? How do I communicate? What's their communication style? Am I just going to wind them up by being excited about a solution that I found? So how do I then address that in myself? So rather than being a positive thing, sometimes it can be your Achilles heel, and that's that greater understanding that I got from the psychometrics.
What advice do you offer for individuals to thrive in the face of workplace challenges?
It goes back, doesn't it, again to that just standing still, not always doing something. We get into this kind of misplaced mindset that if I'm doing something, I'm always moving forward, when actually you just going around in circles or actually drilling yourself into the ground at a quicker pace. So taking time out to look, to listen, and understand yourself. That's the big key thing for me. Because once you do that, you start appreciating other people. Once you know yourself.
What inspired you to write Speak Up, Man Up, and what message did you hope to convey from writing that?
It wasn't speak up, man up. It was speak up, listen down.
Oh, sorry.
I don't think I wouldn't get away with that actually.
Hmm. Is that somebody else's book?
I don't know. I have to Google it. Is it on Amazon? There's my book. It's there.
Mm,
There you go.
no, it's a campaign
Ah,
advertisement.
was it? Ah,
Yeah,
yes. Oh,
sorry about that.
that's okay.
I'm gonna so what inspired you to write Speak Up, Listen Down, or what message did you hope to convey?
Again, going back, primarily for my daughters to leave a legacy. I found it very therapeutic actually, cathartic in writing my story down and experiences, good and bad. I wanted to portray that there's a huge amount of goodwill within the police service and some fantastic people, and they need a voice. And because they have the solutions, it's not always the upper echelon of an organization that has the solutions. Far from it. Very rarely do they come up with something that actually makes a huge difference. So until we tap into those people on the front line, understand who they are, that we're going to get the solutions that the communities want, not and themselves as well as police officers, because they want to see success. They want to make their lives easier by not going to the same person time and time again, but actually solve their problems. And it's a bit of a cliche, isn't it, that you join the police to make a difference. But there are people day in, day out doing that. And it can be through simple little events, not the big kind of events that get us the bunting out, shall we say, and all the trumpets going, but it's the little things that stopping, talking to somebody, stopping to see if somebody's right, knocking on somebody's door to see what's happening and giving a comforting shoulder to lean on. And that was part of it, but also the different thinking. And I wanted to write about the element of complexity and how we can actually promote the right people to the right jobs. Because if we align what we call a person's innate talents, what are they actually born with, it then becomes a universal language. It cuts through all the diversity, it cuts through inclusion and equality. It's what have you got underneath? What were you born with to actually have a purpose and give it the right opportunity to flourish? And it's understanding that and aligning it with the complexity of your role, the position you're in. Because if we do that, then we don't get bullying. And we don't get the toxicity, and we get people engaged with their work and having fun at work as well. Fun, there should be fun in the workplace. That sounds awful, doesn't it? You should be there to do the work. But if you're having fun, engaging with people, talking to people, learning about people, learning about how they tick, crikey, we'd solve so much.
How does a book explore the dynamics of communication between individuals in different positions of power?
Yeah, that's a good question. Again, it's just going back to experience and knowing who you're talking to, knowing how you're communicating yourself, but knowing who you're talking to. Are they somebody who is a linear thinker? In which case, if you're, as I found out, if I'm a more non-linear thinker, I find it sometimes difficult to explain what I'm thinking and solutions or articulate it. So people who want a linear A, B, C, D kind of linear track to a solution won't appreciate somebody like me going to them saying, well, forget A, B, C, and D, let's start at F, because that's inconsequential. We can start here, we can save time, we can save money, start from here. Because if you do this, then that saves this saves this money, this saves these people having to lose the jobs, etc., etc. So understanding who you're talking to, how they like to be communicated with. But again, ideally, they know how they communicate and how they perceive things. So you don't get conflict. You then get people kind of marrying and having that, yeah, that synergy. So it's, again, self-awareness, isn't it? Again, because if you know yourself and how you communicate, then you start appreciating how other different people communicate. And we're all complex and tricky things to work out, but it's worth it though.
Do you provide any insights into the potential barriers or obstacles that may hinder effective communication between the individuals of different hierarchies?
Yes, we do. That's all in the data that we do a 10-minute assessment. I mean, I did it for actually an emergency service contact room of new trainees. And we did 4 trainers and 10 trainees. And you can see where the conflict is going to arise. If you've got somebody who's, shall we say, loves order, and you have somebody who likes chaos, how they're going to approach a problem and an event will be kind of ends of the spectrum. So they can quite easily clash unless they know, actually, you're the person to fill up in that creativity and curiosity. I'm the person to actually bring some order to what you're thinking. So how do you work together rather than we're going to go this way or we're going to go that way? And that is that mishmash of dynamics that come with a team. And that's how we can start to see the conflict. We don't just give people, certainly in a team environment, the data, because it can be overwhelming. Yeah, to try and understand it. So I do it by using my crew resource management exercises. Then they've got something contextual to actually go back to. So we've done this. This is how the exercise panned out. And it could be something quite simple. Now, this is the data that informs us why that happened. And then people start latching onto it. So it can be sometimes a paint by numbers for some people. They need those, right, we're going to paint all the number 1s today, number 2s tomorrow. And you build up that picture. That's the way they communicate and the way they visualize things. But some people will take it on board straight away and say, yeah, I can see that. Yeah, understand that. But it's how people process, the speed of that processing, their mental well-being at the time. Are they engaged or not engaged? Simply, is their mind somewhere else? Have they got things going on at home? An example for me is that a close friend of mine, their father was very ill and they were a teacher. So work wasn't a priority. Looking after him every night and to make sure that he was well at home on his own and put to bed and fed and the carers had been was the priority. So performance will naturally dip. But what was the support that the school were giving to the teacher to say, yeah, I understand what you've gone through. We appreciate that before that performance was off the scale. How do we support you through this here? So you're not going to go off sick. You're not going to get burnt out. Let's put some protocols and excuse me, interventions in place now. So when you come out the other side, you're in a better space. We're not actually adding to the problem. We're actually supporting it. Because yeah, don't do the after school clubs. Don't do the get somebody to help with the marking or get a TA to help you and things like that. What can we do? Because their solutions are there. The solutions are always in the room if you get the right data and the right environment to talk it through.
Can you share any specific examples or anecdotes from the book that highlights the importance of speaking up and listening attentively?
Examples. Just trying to think. For me, it's there are good leaders out there. Don't get me wrong. There's fantastic leaders. I've seen them. They tend to be the minority. They tend not to conform to, shall we say, a mini-me kind of picture that some senior leaders want. Because if this is the problem, you see, is with senior leaders, they want people around them that support them and think the same as them. When actually what we need is that cognitive diversity of people thinking differently to add different ideas into the mix, to be that kind of contrarian mind that actually you're all going that way. Nobody's thought of this way. Have you thought about this? Because by going this route might save us a lot of money going down rabbit warrens that are long and expensive and very dark. But actually, if we just go this way, what tends to happen is that when I go back to that complexity model, 20% are working in that chaos and complex arena environment. They tend to get, or certainly not listened to, they drowned out by the majority of leaders who have been overly promoted. Don't want to show that vulnerability that actually there's a different way here. And that might come from a different level of the organization, not where they're expecting or where they want it to come from, but nevertheless is as valid as the person standing next to them who's got the same rank or below them. So until we get that shared awareness, that cross-section of communication and collaboration, we're going to come up against these barriers. And certainly, I saw it in the police service that senior leaders want people to agree with them. They don't want them to be challenged, and which was a strange thing because the senior leader that I say locked horns with would always come and say, all right, I want to be challenged. Give me some good questions if you're in a group. But as soon as somebody would challenge them, they would actually belittle them, be with a funny downgrading comment. And people then would think, oh, I'm not going to ask a question. Why am I going to ask a question and get ridiculed like that? So I'm just going to sit on my hands. Then the senior leader would get upset and say, I've come all this way to ask or answer your questions, but nobody's answering any questions. And then somebody eventually will come up with like an inane question that is kind of not challenging at all, but they almost know the answer to the question because it doesn't really mean anything. It's got no depth to it. So that was a way of bullying, to put people down, not to be vulnerable themselves, and actually show them that actually they didn't know everything. And that was quite an interesting kind of example. I saw it played out a few times in meetings that I'd been involved with them, that they would belittle people with little quips, little kind of off-the-cuff remarks, be it a haircut, be it or dress code or something like that. And then people think, I'm not going to get involved in that. So it was quite clever in a way, but it worked. But it didn't actually help an organization develop or evolve, or have the conversations that needed to be had. That was the thing. So all those questions, those meaningful questions, were left uncovered.
Does the book offer practical strategies or techniques for improving communication skills and fostering a culture of open dialogue?
Yeah, very much so. It's really what we've talked on. By getting the right people and aligning them with their ability to deal with complexity with the role, then we get these healthier, thriving, engaged environments that everybody benefits in. And yes, and I'm sure you've seen it in college and the work and everything else. You have people in the room who are quiet. You have people in the room that are more distracting, that are more noisy, for want of a better word, who need more of a challenge or stimulation. And until we harbour all that talent in the one room and understand why that person's coming from that position, then we're going to struggle and going to continue with the same problems society has at the moment. So going back to the book, it's appreciation of who we are and how we fit in with other people and how we bring our innate talents to the fore and are able to openly actually express who we are as well. Because we've all got something to offer, given the right space and the right opportunity.
In what ways does Speak Up, Listen Down address the challenges faced by individuals who struggle to find their voice in hierarchical structures?
It's hard. It can be quite daunting. And I think appreciating that you are different in the way you think. It's so easy, isn't it, to kind of acquiesce to the group and just go along. And we see this certainly in the training a lot. Going back to the police training I did with the emergency services, I did an exercise, and one of the exercises is called Stranded, and harks back to 1972 when a rugby team crash landed in the Andes, and they survived for 72 days. And the exercise kind of comes off that. So your aircraft's crashed. You've got 30 items. You can choose 10 of them. So they do it as an individual exercise. Which 10 items are you going to save? And then they come back into a group and then they discuss what's the optimum, what's between the 10, 14 of us, what the 10 items are going to take, and get into discussion and dialogue. And one person said, because one of the items was compendium of games, I'm going to take the compendium of games. And everybody, virtually everybody, laughed. And said, well, why are you laughing? Well, that's silly. Why are you wasting one of the items on a compendium of games? And I said, well, he's there. Ask him why he's taking a compendium of games. And he said, well, if we're going to be stranded for any length of time, we're going to get crotchety with each other, we're going to get bored, and then we're going to have conflict between us. So that's why I've taken the games. It'll take our mind off the boredom. And then somebody thinks, that's not a bad idea, is it? But then, well, how about rather than using an item on the games, excuse me, we use the discarded items we've used for food containers, wrappings, goodness knows what, and make games out of that. So I'm sure you've seen this, and it happens in through all kinds of teams. If we'd listened to that person in the first place, yeah, it might not be the best answer or solution in the first instance, but it's led to a fantastic one at the end result. But we've so often ignore that lone voice, that different non-linear thinking, because they're the minority rather than the majority. And it's the noise of that laughing, the noise of the other voices that actually stop that person from thriving. Because next time they'll think, again, like I go back to the question from the senior officer, I'm not going to bother in the future because nobody's listening to me. I'm not going to get laughed at and ridiculed again. So I'm just going to go into the shadows. And you've lost that talent. You've lost that innovation and creativity, which actually the others are dependent on. And it's that missing piece of the jigsaw. So it's understanding who's in the team and what they've got to offer and where's their place and time to actually thrive as well.
Okay, but so Can you share any upcoming projects or initiatives that our listeners should be on the lookout for?
Yeah, certainly. It's 2024 is going to be an exciting year for us. And I know already mentioned Humanix, which is going to be an app-based assessment, personal assessment in terms of that experiential element of your life in the workplace, which can then lead to self-management. But then we feed it into an organization, and this is basically forget the whistleblowing, forget all those kind of policies. You get a first-hand, first-person micro insight into the pulse of your organization, and it's fluid because we don't just do it once, we do it every 3 months because things change, organizations change. You promote somebody else, you recruit somebody else, somebody's got problems at home, performance dips. So it's that continual kind of flux of an organization, and that's what we're going to be able to measure. So organizations can, rather than saying, right, okay, everybody's having resilience training, everybody's going to have leadership training. They don't all need resilience training. They don't all need leadership training. So where are the hot spots to focus on? Where can we maximize our time, our money, our energy, and focus on the right people that need that support at that time through their own data and through their own experiences. So that's really, really exciting because that can make, again, going back to the policing analogy, making a difference. That will make a difference because we've seen it in smaller groups with what tools we've got at the moment. But this is that scalability and that kind of far wide-ranging kind of, shall we say, ability to get to a wider audience to make a difference in so many organizations then.
How can our listeners connect with you or follow your work after listening to this episode?
The best way is via LinkedIn. I because I tend to work alone, or I've got associates in Slovakia and South Africa and in this country. I just limit my connections to just LinkedIn at the moment. That might change, but I've only got so much energy to give and so much time of the day. So if I had LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, I would be on that all day. So I've just limited it to LinkedIn. So by all means, more than willing to discuss this in more detail and for people to experience it as well. We're always open to that. And we've taken people through the team experience as well as the individual experience. And one thing we do tend to find is if somebody is in burnout, there's a relief that actually their data has pointed out that they actually are in a state of burnout and we can do something about it. Because part of that app and part of the work we do is giving people an understanding of what levers to pull to actually change their experiences, change behavior, change their outlook, and they do a positive and tangible difference to where they are now. But we've got a baseline to work from. So try these interventions, try this idea. Let's talk through it. And then 2 or 3 months' time, let's see what's happened. Has it made a positive difference or not? Do we need to change something else? What has changed as a result of the interventions we made? So it's ongoing. We're all kind of work in progress, aren't we? So it's that continual part of that work in progress, and that just aids it, should we say?
Is there anything else you'd like to share or discuss that we haven't touched upon in this episode?
I think that's fairly comprehensive. By all means, I'll just go back to that. If anybody wants, we'll talk to anybody. I'll talk to anybody, and it's exciting. And thank you for the opportunity, Rosemead, for inviting me on, because it is new. It's new to the UK. It's a different perception and different direction, rather than behavioural. So it's taking some time to actually embed, but having seen it work firsthand, that's the confidence boost, and that's the insight that we can bring to people's daily lives, really. That's the thing.
Thank you so much for being a guest on our podcast.
My
Your
pleasure.
insights were amazing. And it has actually left me with a lot to think about when it comes to like my Children's Chronics, but I'm Iconic's own policies as well. So it was really insightful, and your contribution would definitely help raise awareness and bring attention to all these important topics that we have discussed. And thank you again for sharing your knowledge and being part of our podcast.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for tuning in to another incredible episode of My Trauma's Chronic, but I'm Iconic, with our special guest, David Howell. This episode has been an absolute journey of resilience, growth, and inspiration. David's story reminds us that no matter how challenging life gets, we have the power to rise above and thrive. Stay iconic, and I'll see you next time.